So in just a second, we're going to get into exactly what happened at the Battle of Wanat. Was US Army leadership negligent? Could this have been avoided? And is it ever going to happen again? But first, I couldn't make these videos without the support of our partners, so we have a quick message.
Guns of Glory is an epic, legendary strategy mobile game that is set in an alternative history on the European continent. If you download the Guns of Glory game now, using my link, you'll be automatically given an in-game starter pack. Remember to use our code GOGTask. You play as a heroic musketeer trying to protect the king. You have to train your troops, manage, and build up your city while collecting resources. Pursue alchemy mixed with pre-industrial era technology in this steampunk-style world. Join alliances to play with friends and fight together. Use clever strategies to defeat your enemies. If you download the game using our link, then you'll be entered into a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. Join now for the new Flower Rank Mother's Day event and Alliance Crunch features. Also, remember to check out the Ramparts minigame and unveil the secrets of the Iron Mask. If you're a fan of mobile games, click our link in the description below and start playing today.
Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than the content that I normally make. We're going to be talking about the Battle of Wanat in kind of an unscripted podcast format where we're going to be doing a deep dive into exactly what happened. So throughout this video, I'm going to be using the US Army official reenactment recreation footage that they made in order to illustrate what happened at the Battle of Wanat. You'll see a lot of times the graphics, they're kind of old school, they're not great. So something that's been on my mind recently as I've been reading all these reports about the Battle of Wanat is sacrifice. And what does sacrifice mean in a military context? Because I think that that's the key to understanding the Battle of Wanat. It's the key to understanding the mentality of a US Army infantryman. And I want you to keep sacrifice in mind because it's the theme that runs for me as I'm reading the combat reports, as I'm reading the after action reports. All I'm seeing, and I'm sick to my stomach reading these reports. It's hard to get through because you see exactly what these guys went through and what they were willing to do for each other, and it's horrible. But I want you to keep sacrifice in mind because ultimately, no matter how much of a disaster Wanat was, the bravery of the soldiers shines through here. A lot of great videos are out there on the Battle of Wanat, but what they don't always talk about is some of the context of how this was able to happen, because you see over and over again people ask, didn't somebody look at the command report coming in and say, hey, there's only one US platoon out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by possibly 150 enemy combatants? Shouldn't we do something about that? Shouldn't we send another platoon to reinforce them? Wouldn't that be a good idea? Maybe they need sandbags. I don't know. Shouldn't they have water? These are the questions that people are looking back in hindsight and saying, what happened? And they're perfectly reasonable questions to ask. Let me kind of put this into context, help us understand a little bit how something like this, something ridiculous like this was able to happen. And if we just make a straw man caricature idea of what happened, we just say, you know what? A bunch of stupid officers really screwed up and they were a bunch of negligent idiots. And this only happened because a couple of morons. Then this will happen again if we look at it that way. So I want to look at it, genuinely take a look at the decision-making process for why the Battle of Wanat turned out the way that it did. The reason this happened was because of a strategy that was invented called the clear hold build strategy that was pioneered by General Petraeus, and it was taken from a strategy that they used in Iraq in the Battle of Tal Afar in 2005. Before 2005, the US military strategy, their doctrine, was to have 3 or 4 major FOBs, what's called a forward operating base. And these FOBs are massive. They're the size of an airport. There's usually an airfield in there, heavily guarded by brigade. Thousands of troops are there. The plus side to that strategy is infantry is very safe. You don't have to worry about being overrun. The downside to that strategy is you're never going to defeat an insurgency like that. What they needed was an unconventional warfare approach to defeating an unconventional enemy. And here's what they came up with, and it's kind of genius when you think about it. So what the US Army started doing was clearing out a whole area of enemy insurgents, building small outposts, and then engaging with the local population to keep them away from the insurgent influence. And the way they're able to justify this working is because of force multipliers. One of our favorite military buzzwords, right? Force multiplier. What does force multiplier mean behind all that buzzword speak? Force multiplier is when you're able to put one platoon of infantry out in the middle of nowhere because you have Apache helicopters, you have artillery, and you have long-range surveillance systems. And this is all part of a grander scheme strategy where the US Army is trying to construct new roads, are trying to connect rural populations of eastern Afghanistan to the central government in Kabul. So the move to Wanat. So what's happening here, right? We've moved out from the big fobs. We're on small outposts. Kop Bella is one of these first outposts out there. It's a horrible defensive position. The only way to get to Kop Bella really is by helicopter. So they have to fly in Chinook helicopters all the time to bring supplies. And they see this as a vulnerability. The commanders are thinking, where can we find and set up a better location to reach these strategic goals of ours? Where will we not have to worry about flying helicopters in who could get hit by RPGs? So they find Wanat. They find a place just south of Kop Bella. And when you look at the Army's report, they say troops from prior deployments had said that Wanat was really friendly to them. And so all the intelligence is pointing to Wanat's a good location. Go there, they'll work with you. This is something that the people, the locals, they've been dealing with this for 100 years. The Nuristan people have been knowing how to play the Taliban off the Soviets, off the British, and now here's the Americans. They come in, and the people in Wanat are trying to figure out where should they put their allegiance, who's going to protect them. What happens is there's an attack, a mortar attack on Kop Bella as the troops are getting ready to leave and move to Wanat. And in response to this mortar attack, they call out one of their force multipliers. The Apache helicopters swoop in, they kill the enemy mortar team, and reports say that they also kill about 17 innocent civilians. The people would not, they're understandably pissed off, and they are already on the fence as to who they want to choose to work with. And it looks like this might be the moment where the people in Wanat choose to work with the Taliban. And at Wanat, they're going to set up a whole new patrol base, which this entails a lot. You don't just go there and suddenly the base is set up. They have to work with locals. They're going to bring $1.4 million of money in construction projects to build this base there and to build up the local government. What happens is a couple of things goes wrong. Chinook flies in, they drop off an engineer team, a squad of engineer soldiers who are gonna, with their Bobcat, which is like a little tractor, they're gonna fill up HESCO barriers. HESCO barriers are like giant sandbags which can stop incoming rounds. But the problem is there's limitations to the Bobcat, and as we see, Afghanistan isn't the priority, Iraq is. So all these resources like good construction equipment, it's not going to Afghanistan right now. So they're stuck with this really kind of crappy situation where they're trying to build a defensive position in the first days using just kind of shovels, and they're running out of water. They don't have enough water. They don't have enough fuel. The Bobcat breaks down. All these series of problems happens while the insurgents have been planning an attack. They thought there was only going to be 100 enemy in the area. Really, there's going to be about 300 enemy soldiers descending on the new Kop at Wanat. An IED attack happens, so they're supposed to get this defensive engineering package that would help them build up at Wanat, but they don't get that in time. So they only have 4 days to build these hasty positions. And when you look at the map, they're between a rock and a hard place. They don't really have any good defensive positions to choose. OP topside is built about 75 meters away from the main base, and there's a bazaar between the main base, Kop Kaler, and OP topside. A bazaar is like a marketplace. And this OP, this outpost, is put there so that US forces can have eyes on this dead space area where the terrain of that area is very hilly and mountainous, which means that the insurgents can fire down on their position. And you might say, well, why didn't the US forces set up their Kop Kaler up on top of the mountain so that they couldn't get shot down on? That's a good question, but you got to consider if they had done that, then they would have to fly resupply because they couldn't drive it up there. And they wouldn't have the strategic initiative of being right next to the village that they're trying to engage with. They're trying to separate the insurgents from the locals. And in order to do those patrols, they're going to have to be right there in the village. That's the whole point of this clear hold build strategy. OP topside, there's going to be a lot of controversy about the position that they choose, and really they can choose between one bad position or another bad position, and they choose what they think is the least crappy of the positions. There's only going to be one squad at that OP that gets rotated in and out. And a lot of times in small unit operations with the infantry, where the infantry chooses to place their defensive position, 2 meters to the left or 2 meters to the right can mean the difference of life and death. And they are able to only really get the fighting position halfway up. They don't even have any overhead cover. So at Wanat, all they have is 49 American soldiers, some engineers, 3 Marines, and 24 Afghan National Army. What they're going to be up against, 300 enemy Taliban forces who are well trained and well equipped. 4:20 a.m., 5 militants walking in the distance. They know they're suspicious. Herders don't move like that. So they get ready to attack these 5 guys, but before they're able to, incoming RPG rounds, incoming mortar rounds, incoming machine gun fire from PKM belt-fed automatic machine guns, firing 7.62 rounds down on both Cop Kaler and OP topside. You hear from reports from the soldiers on the ground, they say you can't even make a distinction between what's being fired. Is it a RPG? Is it a machine gun at them? It's such a just cacophony of loud explosions that they're just overwhelmed by this initial volley. What happens is the force multipliers are down right in the beginning. The whole reason that they're able to operate out there with such little amount of troops, so instantly those are taken down and destroyed. They're wounding and stunning every soldier at OP topside. PFC Tyler Stafford is blown out of his machine gun position. He's next to Specialist Matthew Phillips, who continues to throw grenades at the attackers until he's killed. Corporal Jason Bogar fires hundreds of rounds from his squad automatic weapon until it jams, and then he attends to Stafford's wounds. Another rocket-propelled grenade injures Sergeant Ryan Pitts. Sergeant Ryan Pitts is the one that receives the Medal of Honor for his actions at OP topside. Pitts is wounded. Bogar applies a tourniquet to his leg and then goes back to manning another machine gun. So the tourniquet stops the bleeding enough that Pitts is able to carry on fighting. Bogar then jumps from the outpost bunker to get close enough to kill insurgents who are firing down on the men from a village hotel. Outside the bunker, he's shot through the chest and killed. The surviving soldiers then run from the outpost to the main Cop Kaler, trying to not be overrun. But what they don't realize is they left Sergeant Pitts behind. They had called out to him and said, hey, we're leaving, or let's go. Anyone else alive? Sergeant Pitts, probably deaf from all the gunfiring, doesn't hear them give the warning that they're retreating. So he's stuck there alone. A lot of courage comes from knowing that your buddies are right next to you. A lot of what lets infantrymen fight seemingly unafraid is because they know they're backed up. This is a situation where Sergeant Pitts is completely alone, about to get overrun, and the really heartbreaking thing is that he makes the decision to die. He knows he's going to sacrifice his life so that his soldiers at Cop Kaler can have a chance to fight. Because if OP topside goes down at this point, if it's overrun, then Cop Kaler is next. Then we have 50 dead American soldiers instead of 9. So Sergeant Pitts, completely alone, knows he's going to die, starts shooting M203 rounds straight into the sky so that they land right next to him at the enemy that are 10 meters away. He's firing the M240 machine gun with one hand, blindly firing it to keep the enemy at bay. He makes the decision to die with rifle in hand. He's gonna go to the last minute, and he stays out there for 2 hours at OP topside alone, fighting, sending radio messages, letting people know what is happening. And then once finally he gets reinforced 2 hours later, the comrades that come to reinforce him, insane, incredible. They go out there knowing enemies at that position, knowing they might die, but still going. And some of them are killed once they go to save Sergeant Pitts. And one of his buddies gets shot by an RPG right below the body armor plate. And Sergeant Pitts crawls over to his buddy and holds his hand while he dies, because he's alive for a few moments before passing away, and he doesn't want to be alone when he dies. So Sergeant Pitts takes a momentary break from the battle to hold his buddy's hand, and that's the kind of sacrifice that I'm talking about at the Battle of Wanat. 3 times soldiers run back and forth between the main base and OP topside to try to resupply and carry back the dead and wounded. Artillery guns at Camp Blessing are firing 155 rounds at enemy positions, and that's part of the reason why they wanted to move to Wanat, was because the artillery could have better firing positions on Wanat than at the prior Camp Bella. Everyone goes cyclic, and what starts happening is some of the M4s and some of the M249s start going down because they're not meant to be fired at that rate. They're not designed, or they're not capable of handling that rate of fire. And this is something that's going to be a big controversy, where a lot of people feel like the main weapon let these soldiers down. And then there's the other side of the argument that the M4 just isn't designed, it's not meant to be used in that way, and that's why usually the infantry is meant to have a whole company with you. At about an hour later, first platoon, the QRF from the other platoon, is able to get there and able to reinforce and stop the threat of being overrun. And that's what the enemy was really trying to do. Their goal here was to overrun the American forces. The Apaches show up, and this really helps break contact. This is really what helps send the enemy soldiers away. U.S. Army is going to claim that between 21 and 65 enemy militants are killed, and another 20 or 40 they were able to wound, but the coalition only finds 2 dead enemy Taliban. So they decide to withdraw from Wanat and not put a base there. So it's a strategic loss for the US forces. And you'll see that the US Special Forces do an investigation afterwards, where they go into Wanat and they find that the police office there's a ton of RPGs, there's a ton of guns there that had recently been fired. The police were all in suspiciously clean uniforms. After the battle, the US Special Forces discovers that there's all kinds of evidence that the police there at Wanat were helping support the Taliban. There's a number of subsequent investigations, and understandably, people are angry because the US forces didn't have the tools that they need. They were let down by their leadership. And then the army has to decide, how accountable do they want to hold their officers? Is it criminal negligence? Is it something that amounts to a fog of war situation? The army is making a decision to not reprimand officers for the deaths of their soldiers, because they don't, I guess, want to set up a precedence where anytime troops are killed in combat, that they're going to start blaming their officers. I mean, we see some militaries do that. In World War II, if a officer in the Soviet army made a mistake, then the higher ups would kill them. What do you want to do when mistakes happen? And clearly errors were made here. Clearly things could have been done better. I don't claim to know the answers here. A lot of military historians come down on both sides of this argument. And really, what I want to do with this video is to highlight the incredible sacrifices and the incredible bravery of the troops that were present at the Battle of Wanat. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and that you liked it and that you got something out of it. Please let me know in the comments section what you think of the Battle of Wanat and the US military legacy in Afghanistan.